So again, thank you, and thank you to AC Electric for having me back again and not running in the other direction. That's always a good start when you find out somebody's going to come back. As Les mentioned, I don't think the presidential elections have ever been as hot a topic as they are this year, for better or for worse. And to some extent, I think a lot of people are almost sort of tired of it and tired of the tone that it's taking. So what I want to do tonight is to give a little different twist. I don't want to talk politics. I don't want to talk issues. What I want to do is look specifically at the communication strategies that each of the two main candidates are using in order to try to present themselves as the best leader. Look at what's working for them, for certain people, look at what's not working for them and why, and then try to figure out what we can take from that and apply, ideally for good and not for evil, in building our own leadership image as we go forward. So this will be a completely apolitical discussion. I will not be sharing any of my own preferences either way, short of possibly going to Canada when this is all over. But, all right. So to begin with, before we get into the meat of the matter, I wanted to share with you real quick a little miracle that happened over the summer. After several years of unsuccessful trying and a lot of frustration and even a few tears along the way, it finally happened. My parents got smartphones. And why this was important, of course, was because they went kicking and screaming into the 21st century only because my mother's 5-year-old track phone finally gave up the ghost. This was not a voluntary shift. However, once they did finally get that phone together, we've got one for Dad too, because got to do the pair at that point, they realized that maybe this wasn't the worst thing in the world because they could now get pictures instantly, even videos on their phones of all their grandkids, and even do this really cool newfangled thing called Skype, which is not all that cool and newfangled. You're supposed to laugh at that. Come on, don't show your age. Work with me here. And be able to communicate live with us and with them as well. So what they realized was that this technology that they'd been trying to stay away from for so long actually is something that, yes, while there are lots of people who do bad things with it, it could also be used for good. There's lots of really wonderful ways to apply it. And so it's with that same approach, that same sort of perspective, that I would like to approach our topic tonight. So with that, our goal is specifically to look objectively at the way that the candidates are communicating their message, the patterns and the strategies that they are using in order to identify things that we can either use ourselves or avoid using, depending on what you believe is in your best interests, in order to build the strongest, most positive leadership image that you can and maximize your own influence. Okay? This is the goal we're looking for. And with that, there are two very simple disclaimers. As I mentioned, this is politically neutral. I'm not supporting, advocating for either of the candidates that are there, and I'm not judging their platforms. I'm not judging anybody who supports their platforms. I'm not judging anything along those lines. We're strictly looking at this from a communications perspective. Okay?
You can't judge supporters.
So you can do anything you want. That's a whole different talk, and we'll talk afterwards about that one.
You're not doing it, but can we?
You can do anything you want, and for that matter, you can hire me to do it after the fact.
We all know we support Donald over here.
All right, so with that, what we need to realize is that as we jump into the meat of the matter, all campaigns have one overarching end goal: to inspire people to vote for them. And inspiration is important because it's one thing to make people think. It's more important to make people feel. And ultimately, when you put those together, that's where the inspiration comes. If you can make them think and feel, you will inspire them to act. Thinking doesn't get people off the couch. Feeling may or may not. But it's when they're inspired to go and then pull that level for you, that's the end goal that these candidates are looking for. So we're going to look at three main lessons that we can learn from this particular election and from their strategies, and we'll break them down into a variety of components so that we can figure out exactly what is it. We're going to sort of pull back the curtain and see what's going on and what we can take away for our own purposes. So lesson number one, know your audience. Know your audience. There's a rule of thumb in entrepreneurship and in business development in general that is, you need to figure out who your primary audience is and what they want, what they're willing to pay for, and then find a way to sell it to them. You can't do it backwards. You can't say, hey, I think this is really cool. I want to build and sell this. and then try to convince people to buy it afterwards. You have to figure out what people want. So the question then becomes, what do each of these primary candidates' audiences, they're true people, what are they looking for? Well, let's look at the themes. With the Republicans, ultimately, Trump's followers are all about anti-establishment. Government, as is, has not been working. They've not gotten the job done, the system is broken, and in the end, change is necessary. Radical, massive change at almost any expense. And they're willing to take the risk in order to see something that is different be done. On the Democratic side, Clinton is going for the opposite, in part in reaction to the negative response that some people have given to Trump's very anti-establishment, let's break the mold, and who cares what happens to the pieces type of approach in his communication. So she's trying to paint a picture about stability and unity. Yeah, okay, there's some problems in government, but we need to take what has been working and keep with it. It's not that the whole thing should be thrown out. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And then figure out which parts don't work and improve from there, but not go back to square one. So then from there, what also helps to build these themes is not only the message, but the style of speech, the way that they deliver. Just like Trump is about breaking the mold, he's also about breaking the rules. More than anybody else in the political spectrum, he has been able to say things that have made people go more often than ever before and get away with it in ways that nobody else could ever possibly do. And what's interesting is that people who genuinely support him are typically willing to turn a blind eye to a lot of the things that would otherwise be seen as offensive, because it just reinforces the notion that he's something different. He's not just another politician. He's not going to be beholden to these groups. He will not ultimately be a puppet of the establishment. And so this is that reinforces it, even though you don't necessarily appreciate some of the things he's saying. They're willing to let it slide because it just continues to paint the same core message that they want, which is he's not politics as usual. Now, Clinton is running headlong in the other direction. In her messaging, she's really trying to show that everything she says is measured. She never goes off script. When she does, it doesn't usually end well, so she's just learned to paint inside the lines. She's trying to keep it very safe. Safety in messaging is almost her motto. She wants to walk the line for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, number one, she doesn't do so well when she strays. Number two, there's a lot of people out there who don't appreciate the way that Trump has gone so far to the other extreme, so she's trying to appeal to them. And number three, by showing that she's going to be a good girl and just follow the rules in her messaging, it also helps to sort of undo, to balance some of the other things that people are concerned about, where she might have already broken some other rules that they're not so happy about. So we're trying to stay away from continuing to feed that fire, to increase that image. Now, part of what all people want to see in their leaders is a relatability factor. People want to know that their leaders reflect their priorities, their passions, their values, their goals. And so ultimately, it's very important to be able to let people hear that what you feel is the same as what they feel. What you want, what you need, what you strive for is the same as what they do. And so it's interesting, Trump has an amazing ability to make people think and feel that he's the only one who understands the nature of their problems, the cause of it, who's to blame, which is an incredibly important factor, and to believe that he's the only one who's going to get in there and see that justice is done. He does a very good job with painting people as the victims who need to be saved, and that he's the one who's going to do it. And that helps people feel better about themselves, because there's no blame or there's no responsibility. It's all what has happened to them. And then the idea that he's going to come in and fix things. And if it makes you feel better about yourself and give you a sense that there's a rosier future out there for you, who wouldn't like and want to support someone who makes them feel like that? It's a very strong part of the people that he appeals to. Clinton doesn't have that relatability strength. That's harder. She's constantly getting pinged for not being likable, not being, fill in the blank. But it's usually about the human factor. So how does she manage to get that relatability piece up? She has other people speak on her behalf. Go back to the DNC. Who spoke? Chelsea. What did Chelsea talk about? Not how qualified her mother is, how awesome her mother is, how warm, wonderful, loving, funny, supportive, all the things that Hillary doesn't tend to naturally exude on her own. But who doesn't like Chelsea? Right? What's not to like about Chelsea? We watched her grow up. She's nice, she's smart, she's educated, she just got married and had kids, and she's doing all sorts of, what's not to like? And if she tells you, she who is otherwise on a very human level, very relatable, tells you that her mom really is all these great qualities, kind of makes you stop and think, oh, you know, I never really thought about it that way. And why wouldn't you believe Chelsea? So it's smart on her behalf, meaning on Hillary Clinton's behalf, to get other people to speak for her who do reflect the qualities that she does not. You know, when you look at your executive teams, you want to look at your own strength and say, okay, well, I'm not a finance person, I'm an ops person, so I'll make sure I get somebody good at finance. She's looking at her team and saying, well, I'm not good at the charisma part, so let me pull in people with charisma to speak on my behalf. Know your strengths. Now, Trump is also fantastically good at appealing to people's emotion. Okay. Typically that of anger, but this is where he really taps into those people who are willing to get behind him, not just willing to sort of pull the trigger because they're not sure what to do or don't want to vote for Hillary, but those who truly support him. And within that anger, it's interesting to listen to the constant rhetoric that he uses. I don't think I've ever heard a candidate use so much subjective language. You've heard him probably referred to by a variety of people as a demagogue. You've heard the word demagoguery used a lot. What is a demagogue? A demagogue is a leader who appeals to their people's emotion, to their fears, to their established biases and preferences. It's not about appealing on a logical level. So from there, he does this by using these kinds of strategies. For example, villain and victim language. Anytime he's complaining about anything, listen to what he says. Someone is to blame and someone is the victim. Either the system is rigged and the media is biased, right? He's the victim in this, or China is the villain, Mexico is the villain. There's always somebody else out there who is to blame for what's going on. And if anything doesn't go his way, well, of course, he's the victim. It's not because he did something that made people unhappy. It's that somebody twisted something around and he is getting the repercussions of it. He's very good at twisting that. Drama, hyperbole, and melodrama. He likes to even project things. He's phenomenally good at planting seeds in people's minds. Even saying things like, well, if there is a contested convention, which there was the possibility of having, people might riot. I don't know, I'm just saying. Right. But it's planting ideas that they never would have thought about. But now, then when it happens, all he gets to do is claim that he was right. There's drama involved. He's learned the art of the reality TV show. Absolutely, he's pulling that into it. And that's kind of the train wreck television that people, that's the guilty pleasure TV that nobody wants to admit that they watch. They say, oh, well, my kid watches it, that's all. Yeah, I don't watch that at all. It's my kid who watches it. Sure it is. But you can't look away. You might want to, but you can't. The generalizations, stereotypes, and labels, and back with the hyperboles and things, listen to how he describes something. Everything is superlative in the sense of he is either the most fit, healthiest candidate ever to run for this office, according to the doctor's note that apparently was written or something. I'd love my doctor to just write something like that and say, here, sure, go get a job. But there's always, this is the worst, NAFTA is the worst trade deal ever. This was he used the tax laws brilliantly to decide how much he was going to pay over the last decade or however long. But there's always the adjectives that go along with it that not only tell you what to think, he tells you how to feel about it. And people, when they're just in a deluge, they're in this barrage of information and words, people do sort of want to be told what to feel, what to think. They don't know it, but they do very willingly receive it. You need to, in your messaging, not just give people facts, but to help them understand, and this is good, or and this is bad, which is why we need to fix it. We can't just go on just the facts part of it. When you look at things like you're viewed as a threat when you suddenly get a nickname from the Trump administration, right? We look at Cruz, which was Lion Ted, Clinton is now crooked Hillary. Right. Even Jeb Bush back in the day when it looked like he might have had a chance, it was just low energy. Low energy, whatever. It was about dismissing them. How do we give them one label that'll stick in people's minds as an emotional connection that'll say, they're not worth it. Just one little word. So what are the takeaways from this first lesson about knowing your audience? Number one, know who your audience is, whether it's your board, whether it's your clients, whether it's your team, your employees. Who is your audience and what is most important to them? And then in the end, you need to be emotionally involved in your message. Now, I want to be clear on that one. I don't mean be emotional necessarily, and I don't mean going to the extremes that Trump does in appealing so almost exclusively to emotion and to very strong and usually negative emotion. But so often, I get pushback from people when I say, you need to put a little energy, a little more emotion into the way that you're talking to your group. And they say, well, but a lot of times, the information that I have to share at our weekly meetings or at our this or our that is not so exciting. Right? Anybody feel like that? Like sometimes got to give updates and whatnot, it's not always that exciting. I never said it had to be exciting. What I said was that you have to be emotionally involved to the extent that people understand that you feel like it's important. Not that you're just, going through the rote motions and, it's Monday, so I got to update you on this stuff, so let's just get it over with so we can go back to, email and coffee or something along those lines. Do you think this is important? Should I think this is important? Why? Help me understand this. And then what do I need to do with it? Get me on board, because people will first feed off of your energy before they will even tune in to what the content of your message is. So if you get up in the beginning and sort of exude, okay, ready? Start the meeting? Yeah. People have already tuned you out. They've assumed that it's not important because you don't want to be there either. People, you have to, just like he does, you have to let people know how to feel about what you're talking about. And part of that is subconscious in the energy that you use. What mood do you set before you even start? All right, lesson 2, be memorable. Okay, how do we do this? Messages need to be clear and concise. There's a great quote here from Einstein that might be too small for you to see there, but it says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. People don't remember something that they can't recite. It has to be easy enough that they can recall it, and not only recite it and recall it for themselves, but in something like a political election or anything where you're trying to get massive buy-in, people have to be able to talk about it when you're not there and still reflect it accurately when talking to someone else. So you really do need sound bites that are easily digestible. Don't go showing off with your extreme knowledge and all your fancy vocabulary. Make the message digestible for the average person. So, for example, let's do a little test. Audience participation here. Let's start with Trump. Just call out any of the campaign promises or slogans or repeated mantras and refrains. Build a wall, take out ISIS. What's that? Okay, lock her up.
Believe
right?
me.
Believe me, definitely. What else? It's huge. Everything's huge. Right. And there's only 2 hand signals, right? It's this or this, this or this. It's emphatic, right? Those are the only 2.
Huge.
So we've got those very easy, right? Easily digestible. What are they? 2, 3, maybe 4 words? Very easy, very concrete action items, checklist. You can recite his whole platform. Build the wall, lock her up, take down ISIS, make America great again. That's the longest one, it's 4 words. Right? How about Clinton's campaign?
Somebody togetherness. I'm with her.
Stronger together.
I'm with her, stronger together. Okay. So what's she gonna do? No idea. And this is from a room with probably 50% people who are likely to go and vote for her, just by statistically, and we still don't know because her messaging has been terrible. I mean, frankly, if you gave me the choice of which candidate would I work for, just for the sake of, a good paying job, at that point, I would take Hillary every day of the week and twice on Sundays for 2 reasons. 1, Trump's not coachable. There's no point in working with him. He's not interested in anybody else's opinion. 2, she is, and her team is failing her miserably. How can you get this far in the election and have a room full of the most educated, professional, successful professionals on the planet, and nobody can recite anything other than her campaign slogan, stronger together? which, by the way, what's the verb in that? The implied verb. To be, right? We are stronger together. Totally static. Kumbaya. That's nice. Right? There's no energy, there's no action, there's no to-do list.
Writing campaign starts now. None of the above. Thank you.
So this is part of the challenge. You have to be memorable. And it has to be concise in order to be memorable. Not only does it have to be concise, but people want to hear the message firsthand, not second, third, fourth hand recalled. They want to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Although in this election, there's a lot of argument that perhaps it is coming from the other end of the horse. But that's for others to decide. They do not want to hear things through the grapevine secondhand because at that point, it gets watered down. And what I mean by that is that the association gets watered down. When I hear something come from you directly, I make that connection, you, to your message. How it sounded, how I felt, how I thought, how you looked. It creates a much stronger bond as opposed to when it comes second, third hand through the grapevine, it's much easier to dismiss, assuming you even process it in the first place. Yeah.
So why have both campaigns and the media use so many surrogates for this? It's the worst I've ever seen. You get people yelling and screaming at one another. You know, it's programming. I understand that from the TV side, but it runs counter to your message. They're not getting the message firsthand. Once they do get it initially, and then it's watered down and it's recycled for the next 48 hours, until they recycle the next thing.
He's not a plant. Thank you for giving me that segue.
I think this is the start of his campaign. I think it's I can hear it. He's going. I hear it.
So here's the why. Here's my take on the why. And I will disagree partially with one piece that you just said, which is that Trump.
It was a question. How can you disagree?
Well, with the premise that both sides are using more surrogates. Trump produces fodder by the minute, from his Twitter account, which he's completely addicted to whatever else. He loves the spotlight. He loves the microphone. Give the man a chance to talk to anybody. Doesn't matter. He wants you to hear it from his own mouth. He very much lives by this philosophy. So now, even if you're going to the coffee machine in the morning and the scuttlebutt is, did you hear what Trump said this time? You're still saying, here's what I heard him say. You have that strong connection. You're going to argue pro or con, but it's planted in there, which is what he wants.
But he did use Giuliani that real bad weekend
Sure.
as a surrogate, probably because he didn't want to be put on the spot on all those Sunday morning political shows.
Sure. And ultimately, you do want other people to speak for you. You don't want to be the only voice with nobody vouching for you. That's part of the whole argument with Paul Ryan and other things going on in Congress, where half of the Republican Congress doesn't want to support him at all. So that's a whole other issue. Frankly, the hardest part about preparing this talk was keeping it to a reasonable time length, because every day there's more stuff to include on it. And that's exactly to your points. There are all these examples that just keep popping up. But Hillary, knowing that the more she talks about something, the more concrete it becomes, she actively wants to avoid that. Because as soon as she's in the spotlight, and every time she's in the spotlight, what comes up? Email. Anybody else sick of hearing about emails, generally speaking? So what she's aiming to do is, the latest one about, what was it, somebody in her campaign who had written a letter however many years ago that was rather insulting to Catholics, evangelical Christians, and other more conservative Christians. How was it talked about? It was that on the news, they reported that an email sent by one of her people talked about, it's like 3 levels removed. It's not Hillary said X. So there is that distance. That is grapevine that works in her favor, because as long as she's not actively talking about it herself, it stays nebulous. The minute she has to address it herself, it becomes concrete. Then it's serious, which is part of why she has stayed out of the spotlight for as long as she has. She does better that way. She's sort of hoping, go ahead, Trump, take as much time, monopolize the spotlight, take as much of it as you want, because anytime he's there, there's just as much of a chance that he's going to say something that's going to hurt him as will help him. So she's hoping she's going to give him just enough rope to hang himself. This is really their strategy, because staying out of the spotlight, the one thing that keeps coming up with her is that stupid email issue. So To not have it come front and center is what she wants it to do. Plus, she doesn't have the charisma that, sadly, Trump, her husband, or the current president have. They all have led through charisma, which is not a quality that she particularly exudes. So she can't count on that to bail her out when she is called to the carpet. But one of the other things that she is good at is knowing, recognizing, and acknowledging her own weaknesses. I thought one thing that she did particularly well at the DNC was saying that, recognizing that she was never good at the public part of public service. Implication, I'm not a talker, I'm a doer. Okay, so I'm not the most charismatic person, but I'll go and I will serve in this way as my track record has shown. And really, by saying the fact that, look, I'm not great at public speaking, that's probably one of the most relatable things she's ever said. Because really, how many of us would want to be up there in a stadium with tens of thousands of people and on television in front of the world all the time? Not many. So to say, look, that's not my strength. That's one of the more relatable parts of her that people can connect with. Where she does, however, tend to connect more with people is in smaller venues. It's interesting that when she goes to a high school gymnasium or a local library or a church, and she is able to have these small discussions like we're having here tonight, that's when people come out and say, you know what, she actually was really personable. Effectively, Chelsea was right. That's her medium. That's her sweet spot in these small venues. So that's when people do see all those good qualities. So she's trying to do more of a grassroots campaign, not get people to talk about her in good ways from the ground up. So she's utilizing what works for her, she's acknowledging what doesn't work for her, and trying to work around it. The same way, and I'm going to qualify this statement, whereas Trump primarily appealed to people's emotions, Clinton tends to go more toward the logic. Now, I'm not saying that emotional people vote for Trump and logical people vote for Clinton. This is not what I'm saying. But if you look at the things that she talks about, whereas he uses all the descriptive words, right? It was a disaster, this is horrible, this is amazing, all those kinds of descriptors, she just sticks to the facts, for better or for worse. When she's talking about the email and the few times that she has done it, she just sticks to the same sentences, the same facts. I didn't know this, I didn't realize that, I apologize for this, and okay, let's move on. There's no emotion in it. There's no descriptors in it. It's very skeleton level of the information. Even when she talks about policy, same thing. She'll give her list of how she wants to approach things, and that's that. She doesn't describe how wonderful it's going to be. She doesn't describe how awesome anything was. Even in talking about her strengths and her qualifications, in some ways, arguably, she's one of the most qualified people ever to run for the office, having been senator, having been Secretary of State, even the insight she gained being First Lady. But when she talks about her experience, it's like she's reading a resume. I was First Lady, I was Secretary of State, I was this, bam, bam, bam. Very straightforward, cut and dry. She doesn't ever even say, while senator, we passed this bill, which was a fantastic opportunity. It brought wonderful resources. There's no editorializing. She needs to step up a little bit and toot her own horn, not in a braggartly sense, but she's not telling people how to feel, what they should interpret. This bill was passed. So, what do we get out of it? Tell me why I should be excited about that and want you to be able to do it more. This is something Trump does very well, and she needs to take a book from his page from his playbook, and she's not doing it. I mean, when she does try to go into his camp, into his world, and talk in his way, what's the worst thing that she said? Trump is temperamentally unfit for the presidency. Ooh, watch that smack talk. That's as creative as you get. Don't you have people who write for you? Memorize some other line. Again, but that notion of being temperamentally unfit, what's interesting is the subtext question, which is, what does fit look like? What does temperamentally fit to be president mean? Because she's implying that unfit means kind of crazy and off the cuff and uncontrolled, unpredictable. But then, what is fit? Status quo, what you've always seen. It's safe, it's predictable, but is it memorable? This is part of the challenge. So, lesson 2, takeaways. In order to be memorable, you need to simplify your message as much as possible to get the maximum buy-in. People need to be able to recall it and recite it for it to stick. You need to deliver your message personally at some point. Now, whether you've got a company of 50 or 50,000, at what point does everyone involved, whether it's your employees or your clients or your board, whoever it is, when do they hear something directly from you? Because when they hear it from you up at the top, that's when they feel like they matter. That's when they feel like they're worth it for you to come and talk to. Now, it may not be face-to-face in a conversation like this, but can you do it through a video that gets sent out to everybody? Can you do it in an annual holiday party context? When and how can you get in front of people and know that it's not just 2 or 3 levels of trickle-down messaging, that eventually it gets to them, but that you want to make sure that they all hear it in person because they matter. And in the end, play to your strengths, but also be willing to share some weaknesses. People appreciate a little bit of vulnerability. Even if it's about the company, not your vulnerability, they want to know, where are we? Let's not sugarcoat it, let's be real. And how can we improve from here? What are we going to do about it? How much do you trust me to let me know this? I'm not saying show me all the skeletons in your closet, but there's a humanity, there's a relatability involved in that little bit of honesty. Lesson 3, confidence attracts. Part of being confident is being authentic. You have to show that you are absolutely comfortable with who you are and what it is that you need to talk about, for better or for worse. Now, authenticity does not necessarily mean impulsive or unfiltered. Right? To be authentic doesn't necessarily mean that you just have to say whatever you're thinking in the moment that you're thinking it. Obviously, a filter has its time and place, as does when you share certain kinds of information. But let me ask you this. Is there anybody out there, regardless of whether or not you agree with anything that he says, who would argue against the idea that Trump believes 100% of what comes out of his mouth as he's saying it? Even if later on he may go back and say, perhaps I shouldn't have said that, or this would have been better. In the moment that he's saying it, he believes 100% that what he's saying is accurate. Whether he's making it up and sharing an opinion, or providing data, or what he claims is data, he is truly convinced that he's correct in saying what he's saying. And that conviction brings people together. That's very credible. That makes people trust you. That makes people believe in you because you seem so certain about it.
He believes it.
He believes it.
Yeah,
Yes. He believes what he's saying. Whether or not anybody else does doesn't matter,
Right.
but he does. Even if it's about how he knows more about ISIS than the generals do. The minute he makes that comment, he actually believed that he said it afterwards, whether or not there's
tax lawyer, all
right.
that stuff.
He believes it when he says it, regardless of whether or not there is any evidence to back it up is not the problem. Right. So, and
How can
part
he
of
possibly believe that? That one statement, how can he possibly believe that?
that is way beyond my pay grade. But that's
Possibly believing there's more.
I'm gonna just not touch that one with a 10-foot pole. From there, though, along with being authentic and being confident, you have to sound confident. And frankly, it's one area in which almost any politician, a professional politician, if they didn't have it naturally, they did get coached on it, because there are certain things you have to do with your voice which project an air of credibility. Things like having a declarative tone when you speak. Just like when you read an email, you read a paper, whatever it is, you need to see those periods at the end of the sentence, right? Well, similarly, when you talk, you want to hear a vocal period at the end of the sentence. The voice needs to drop. It sounds solid. It sounds like I'm telling you something. None of them have fallen into the modern traps of things like upspeak, which is that pattern where a lot of people sound like they're constantly asking questions even when they're not, you know, with that rising intonation at the ends of all their phrases and sentences. And while that's not only annoying, at the same time, the problem is that it sounds like you're constantly inflecting a lot of little implied, right, okay, you know? And if you're constantly doing that, it's like you're begging for validation, for affirmation from the audience. Well, if you're looking to be a leader, to be viewed as a leader, yes, you certainly want to seek agreement, you want to seek buy-in, you want to seek consensus at times, but you don't need to be begging for somebody to say, yes, you are correct, it's okay. So making sure that you've got that balance. Similarly, monotony is really just the other side of the coin of that upspeak, where as opposed to just going through the information that you want to share and telling people that this is the first point we'll be discussing, and from there there's the second point, where there's just no inflection. Actually there is, it's very similar to upspeak, it's just a tiny little rise at the end, but it's almost imperceptible. There's not enough variation to sound interesting, to sound different, to make anything jump out at you. So avoiding these two things or avoiding these two patterns, vocal patterns, are things that they are both very good at. And similarly, there's no vocal fry. And if anybody out there happens to be a Kardashian fan, perhaps, you might recognize the vocal fry pattern, which is really sort of common in that group of people where it kind of sounds proggy, like you're frying it out, because it's just a very social kind of, it's becoming more and more common. And what happens is
Don't
that—
you start doing that, Les.
Lisa, run the board meeting like that tomorrow.
all yours. But the issue is that a lot of people will tend to slide into that when they're low energy, when they're tired, when they're not confident, because it's like, well, I need to talk to you about this, but I'm not really sure I want to, and I don't know if you're going to like what I have to say. So you have to put air underneath it. You have to support your voice just like you have to support your point with facts. So a nice deep breath, you speaking from the diaphragm, get that clear voice to come out, but don't let it creak when you're sort of maybe you start strong, but then you sort of trail off at the end because you're sort of done. Yeah?
Laura, do you think that Hillary's had a vocal makeover? It sounds like the tone of her voice has gotten a lot less shrill this campaign than it had been in months past.
I have no official evidence either way, but I would bet anything that yes. They all have those coaches, and she definitely has had an image coach because the relatability issue has been her problem. So what is it about? And people have criticized, and this is part of a gender challenge that we don't have time to get into today, but she gets criticized for stuff no guy has ever gotten criticized for in the political spectrum. I mean, of all people, she gets criticized for her hair. Please look who she's running up against. I mean, she gets criticized for her laugh, criticized for her voice, criticized for her facial expressions. I mean, it's a no-win situation. There's pantsuit, right?
Can't lounge on a chair.
There's no way, that women just do get nitpicked for those kinds of things far more than men do. And I mean, granted, her husband was president, so it was a whole other issue there that she was part of, but she's going to be criticized for the sins of her husband in ways that no other spouse will be scrutinized. And now, granted, there's reason for it, but she will be held much more responsible for things that she really didn't have anything to do with. So there is the challenge there.
I don't think it's that at all. I think she's criticized all those things because people just don't like her.
Sure, it's an easy thing to pick on.
Because there's many women who run for office, even in
Sure.
this state, who no one's criticized any of those things when they were out. It's just because people don't like her.
Sure, and
that's the
she's
bottom
also
line.
at the top level now, so she has the primary spotlight, so people are going to do everything. They're going to, when they don't like you, they are going to pick apart everything possible. And it is a chicken or the egg, right? Do I pick on you because I don't like you, or do I not like you because people are picking on you and helping me to see those kinds of things? But yeah, it's a challenge.
4 years.
It's going to be tough either way, absolutely. So from there,
No.
the other part about confidence and authenticity is the notion of playing to win and talking about it explicitly in these terms. Not just talking about playing not to lose. There's a time to be conservative and there's a time to be aggressive. And when you're campaigning for something big, it is not the time to just sort of take cautious steps, but playing to win. And this is definitely something that Trump has mastered. If you look at some of the quotes over the months, probably the rest of his life, he said things like, I would like the backing of the GOP, but I don't need it. Think about what that's saying. I'm going to win with or without you. So you've got two choices. Join me and be a winner together, or be stupid, don't join me, watch me win, and be a loser. Those are your two options. Feel free to make your choice as you like. In talking about his business dealings, as I was knocking out the competition, bing, 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 one by one, right? It's like he's Muhammad Ali, he's the prize fighter. Everything is a zero sum. There's winners and there's losers. Pick one. His business dealings, he won everything to his telling. Even things like, I shamed Hillary Clinton into bad judgment or apologizing for things. It's about domination. He has dominated her. She has been forced into submission under his will, as he likes to try to frame things. So it's always about who comes out on top, who's on the bottom at that point, winning and losing. Even today, as early as this morning, I had to update the slide really fast before I got here, talking about Paul Ryan, who's stepped further away from him at that point, and he's saying Paul Ryan doesn't know how to win. He doesn't know how to win. It's not about whether or not there's any ethical reason, any other logical reasons why he's backing off. It's just that he doesn't know how to win, and that's all that matters. It's about winning. And the thing is, people want to join the team that wins. Unless it's an underdog situation, because Americans do love an underdog, which is much of why Bernie Sanders had such a following. They do not want to get on board with someone who needs their help to win. They want to join the team that's going to win, and they want to contribute to it, but they don't want it to be, well, you know what, this guy's not likely to win, but I like him, so I'll help him out. They do not want to join the team that doesn't have it together. You need to sell the fact that winning, however you want to define winning, is your intention and is the only option and where you're going. Tell people how they are going to win when they're with you. Now, what's interesting is that while all of the wins that he has, he completely takes credit for. And there's no shared credit in Trump's wins. But in responsibility for anything that is anything other than a win, it's a very different story. He does not take responsibility for any sort of loss involved. If something doesn't go his way, how does he frame it? He wasn't treated fairly, the system is rigged, the media is biased, the trade deals are unfair. There's always, again, we're back to that villain-victim language, but there's always something involved that shows why if he doesn't win, there must be a reason. Because if it were truly a level playing field, the only logical possible outcome would be his victory. He's very good at painting that image. And people see that, people like it, they want to get on board with it. And in the end, again, if he does have a problem, it's because people are out to get him. There's that victim part. So as long as he can avoid any impression of responsibility, then he also gets to avoid the need to apologize for anything. And Americans are funny because Americans culturally have an extremely short memory by comparative international standards. It's not about your real history. It's about what have you done for me lately. You can screw up pretty royally, but if you come back honest, contrite, set the record straight and clean up, Americans generally will give you a second chance. That being said, in Trump's case, when he gets caught on something that most people feel like he should apologize for, he goes the other direction and doubles down. There's no reason I need to apologize for this. I did nothing wrong. And then he'll twist it and talk about why somebody else did something else wrong instead. But to the best, I think, what was it, a couple of weeks ago, his handlers finally got him to say, you know how sometimes you say the wrong words come out? Well, that happened to me. I regret it. That was the extent of his apology. Now, what words he actually felt were the wrong words, we don't know. Why did he think they were the wrong words? We don't know. What about it did he regret? We don't know. But that was the extent.
Fault.
What's that?
Billy Bush's fault.
That's the more recent one.
That's correct.
That's the more recent one. And there was a little bit more of a contrite apology in that took a very long time to craft. And he's been a sin thing, managed to get away with all of that as well. Now, Clinton, on the other hand, has played with a lot more apology. She's very comfortable giving apologies because she realizes that that is what people ultimately want to hear. And the more that the email stuff keeps coming up, the same routine challenges over and over, yet another WikiLeaks email, just keep saying, I've already said it, I apologize. I've already said it, I apologize. Because there is a, again, not talking about the issue that she's addressing, but there is a class, there is a classiness in apologizing, in recognizing that you have done something that requires atonement and saying it. Most people are willing to, like I said, to forgive you for something you've done if you will sincerely apologize. And where I think it is, one of the things that was amazing to me, and another place where I think her team really dropped the ball and that he managed to capitalize on it, was that, for example, when she did stray off script and very foolishly blurt out the comment about half of Trump's supporters being a basket of deplorables, which was absolutely shooting herself in the foot, she did apologize, which is exactly what she should have done. The moment it came out of her mouth, she knew this had to be fixed. That was a very big misstep. But at the same time, Trump turned around and demanded that she apologize. So when she did, because her own team realized it was necessary, Trump gets to say, see, I was right. I demanded it, and I forced her to apologize. So once again, he wins, she loses, he takes power over her. It's about domination. And he's done a very good job of twisting this around. And where her team failed miserably was in her apology, or as part of it, not turning around, and why she didn't turn around and say, quid pro quo. I do take responsibility for when I say something inappropriate, and I'm sorry for it. Your turn. You have the audacity to demand that I apologize for one infraction. Your turn. How about you apologize to list all of the people in groups or individuals that you have offended over the time? Or are you just going to be a hypocrite? Turn around, use his playbook against him, go for a label, Donald the hypocrite, or whatever it is. But there are plenty of examples that she could be pulling from, and she's not. She just allowed herself to look contrite and weak, and to make him look like he won yet again. And what's important to recognize in doing apology well is the distinction between humiliation and humility. Humiliation is something that strips people of their dignity. Humility restores it. Saying the comment about calling half of Trump's supporters a basket of deplorables, that is something that stripped her of dignity very bad, quickly. It made her look very bad. She did it to herself. But by immediately turning around and giving a sincere apology, or at least a sincere sounding apology, there are those who will forgive her for it. So that restored the dignity. And that's an interesting thing because it also follows a lot of gender stereotypes. When it comes to apologizing, women are far more likely to apologize even when they don't do something wrong. They say, I'm sorry about that. So not that she's doing that, but it is something to bear in mind. And men are more likely to be complained about by women for not apologizing for things that women wish they would apologize for. And so recognizing that if just the apology came through, things would be better. Where I think Trump has made a big gaffe is by not having just a little bit of humility and apologizing for more of the things that he has said, in particular about women, not just denying it, but apologizing for it, because a lot of women who are on the fence would forgive him if he just said he was sorry. But his ego won't allow him to do that. And we talked a minute ago about the differences between going along with the concept of the gender stereotypes, the two different slogans of the campaigns, where the Make America Great Again is very active language. It's got a verb and a directionality. It's got a trajectory. It's win-lose. And it's very dynamic in nature. It shows the change that we want to happen. And that's very male, very competitive in nature. It shows competition, as opposed to the collaborative nature of the Democratic slogan in Stronger Together. It's just a statement of status. We are stronger together. Doesn't move, doesn't compete, doesn't have power. It claims power, but there's no oomph in it. There's nothing to grab onto, and there's no bandwagon that moves. And these do follow along some very unfortunate gender stereotypes. So what are the takeaways that we can get out of lesson 3 about confidence? Number 1, speak decisively. Use decisive words and good decisive tone of voice. Number 2, be authentic in who you are and in what you claim. Number 3, play to win and frame it as such. People want to get on board with the winning team. And last, know when to apologize, when not to apologize, and how to apologize. It is a virtue when used correctly. So in conclusion, our 3 major lessons that we can take from these campaigns are: number 1, know your audience and what matters to them. Number 2, be memorable. And number 3, be confident, but balance that confidence with an appropriate degree of humility. And in the end, when you pull all of those together, you want to inspire people to act, not just think. So with that, I will thank you. I will gladly stick around for some more questions and answers, and thank you for having me here.
Any
Questions?
questions?
Comments, questions?
This really worked.